I went undercover before starting as the new district health inspector to see how kitchens really operated. Chef Randy shoved me in the walk-in freezer for 20 minutes saying, when I let her out, she'll either blow me or never work in this town again. He posted my home address in a restaurant group chat with my photo, saying watch out for this scammer, and within hours I had chefs showing up at my apartment door, while others spray-painted "Liar lives here" on my wall. I was starting as the new district health inspector next week, and instead of making a grand entrance, I wanted to spend one day visiting kitchens quietly to see the real operations, not the show people put on for inspectors. Nothing could have prepared me for when I met Randy, the head chef that other inspectors warned me was untouchable. I walked through the delivery entrance wearing old sneakers and a messy bun, looking like any other job seeker. Randy was at his prep station when I approached, and he didn't even glance up from his chopping. "Kitchen's not hiring. Hostess applications are at the front," he said, pointing vaguely toward the door with his knife. Before I could respond, he physically turned me around by the shoulders and pointed me toward the exit. The dismissal was so casual, like I was a piece of trash that had blown in. I decided to stand my ground. "I have experience in food service," I said calmly. That got his attention. He finally looked up and laughed so loud that other cooks turned to watch. "Free entertainment, guys," he called out to his team. "Another one who thinks watching cooking shows makes them a chef." He circled me slowly, narrating in baby talk. "Does the Whittle girl know how to hold a knife? Can she wash a dishy-wishy?" The other cooks snickered as he dumped an entire bus tub of dirty plates in front of me. "Show me you can handle the easiest job in the kitchen first." I started washing dishes, keeping my expression neutral while Randy continued his performance. When I reached for an ingredient to examine it, he turned on the burner right under my hand as a prank. The flames shot up as I managed to yank my hand back just in time. When I steadied myself, he shoved a spoon at my face. "Taste this sauce. Open up." Before I could react, he decided to test my reflexes by dropping a knife near my feet. I jumped back just in time as it clattered on the floor inches from my sneakers. The kitchen erupted in nervous laughter. "Turn around," Randy commanded. "Let's see if you'll distract my line cooks." I hesitated, and he spun me himself, his hands lingering on my shoulders. "Not bad from behind. Bend over and get that pot from the bottom shelf." When I crouched instead, he pulled me back up. I said, "Bend over. Need to see if you can follow simple instructions." His breath was hot on my neck as he adjusted my apron from behind, his fingers taking way too long to tie the strings. "My apartment's upstairs," he whispered. "I think we should discuss your qualifications privately." When I tried to step away, he grabbed my hand and traced his finger along my palm. "Let me show you the proper grip," he said, pressing against me from behind. I pulled away and his whole demeanor shifted. He grabbed his phone and snapped a photo while I was grimacing. "Look at this face," he said, showing his phone to the other cooks. "This is going to every kitchen in the state. They'll know exactly what kind of girl comes begging for work." He showed me his phone screen with a restaurant group chat already open. "I'll tell them you're an intimacy worker who targets restaurants. One message and you're done forever." Before I could move, he snatched my wallet from my back pocket and pulled out my ID. He held it up and took another photo, making sure to capture my address. "Now I know where you live too." The kitchen had gone quiet. Randy looked around at his staff with a sick smile. "You know what? I think our new friend needs to cool off." He grabbed my arm and dragged me to the walk-in freezer. As he shoved me inside, he announced to everyone, "When I let her out, she'll either blow me or never work in this town again." The lock clicked shut. I sat in the freezer checking my watch and making mental notes of every violation I'd witnessed. 20 minutes later, Randy opened the door with a smirk. "Ready to be reasonable?" I walked out without a word, heading toward the exit. That's when the owner burst through the kitchen doors. "Has the health inspector arrived yet? District said she'd be here by now." He stopped mid-sentence when he spotted me by the freezer door, still shivering. His face lit up with recognition. "Inspector Sinclair, I didn't realize you'd already started." He rushed over with his hand extended, genuinely excited. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here to greet you properly." Randy's face drained of all color. His knife clattered to the floor. The owner kept talking, oblivious to his chef's panic. "I hope you've had a chance to observe our operations. Randy runs a tight ship here." Randy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His hands started shaking as he stammered, You said you were..." The other kitchen staff began backing away from him slowly. Every threat, every touch, every humiliation flashed across his face. I walked out without saying a word, and as I drove home, I had no idea that Randy had posted my address in that restaurant group chat, and he had a team of angry chefs who were already planning their revenge. The notification sound from my phone made my stomach drop. Randy's message in the restaurant group chat glowed on my screen. "Watch out for this one. Claims to be a health inspector, but she's just a scammer. Lives at 4782 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Don't let her near your kitchens." My hands trembled as I scrolled through the responses flooding in. Dozens of chefs from across the district were saving my address, sharing it with their own networks, adding their own embellishments to Randy's story. Someone posted the photo he'd taken of me grimacing, captioning it with accusations I couldn't even bring myself to read fully. I pulled into my apartment complex and noticed a van I didn't recognize parked near my building. My pulse quickened as I climbed the stairs to my unit. There, taped to my door, was a printout of my photo from the group chat with "Liar" scrawled across it in red marker. Inside my apartment, I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the door, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed again. Another message in the chat. "I know this girl. She tried the same scam at my place last month. Complete fabrication, but already getting likes and angry responses." I spent the next hour documenting everything on my laptop, screenshotting the messages, saving the photos, creating a timeline of events. My official start date as district health inspector was still 5 days away. 5 days for this to spiral completely out of control. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in chef's whites. One was holding up his phone, clearly recording. I stayed silent, waiting. After a few minutes, they left, but not before I heard one say they'd be back. I couldn't stay trapped in my apartment. I had 3 more restaurants on my unofficial pre-inspection list, and I wasn't going to let Randy's intimidation tactics stop me from doing my job. I dressed in my most professional outfit, gathered my documentation, and headed out through the back exit of my building. The first restaurant went smoothly. The owner didn't recognize me, and I was able to observe their lunch prep without incident. But at the second location, I noticed the head chef kept glancing at his phone, then at me, his expression growing darker. He whispered something to another cook, who immediately pulled out his own phone. I maintained my composure, continuing my observations, but I could feel the shift in the kitchen's energy. The chef started making deliberately loud comments about fake inspectors and women who lie for attention. When I went to check the walk-in cooler temperatures, he blocked my path. "You need to leave," he said, holding up his phone with my photo displayed. "We don't serve your kind here." I left without argument, my cheeks burning. In my car, I saw 3 new messages from unknown numbers. The first was a voice message of heavy breathing. The second was a photo of my car in the restaurant parking lot. The third was from Randy himself. This is just the beginning. Over the next 2 days, the harassment escalated. Chefs showed up at every restaurant I tried to visit, warning the owners about the scammer. My apartment building's security camera caught 4 different people trying my door handle at various hours. Someone left a box of rotting fish outside my door. My car tires were deflated twice. I started keeping detailed records of everything. Every message, every incident, every person involved. I installed a doorbell camera and carried pepper spray, but I refused to stop my preliminary inspections. This job meant everything to me, and I wasn't going to let Randy and his network of bullies take it away. On the 4th day, I arrived at a small bistro just as they were opening. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Colt, didn't seem to recognize me. I was halfway through observing their prep work when a younger chef burst through the back door, phone in hand. "That's her," he shouted, pointing at me. "The scammer from the group chat." Mrs. Colt looked confused, glancing between us. The chef showed her his phone, scrolling through the messages about me. Her expression hardened as she read. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "We don't want any trouble." As I walked to my car, I noticed the young chef following me, recording everything. He stayed uncomfortably close, narrating to his phone about catching the fake inspector in action. When I got in my car, he knocked on the window, still filming. That evening, my doorbell camera alerted me to movement. Randy himself was standing outside my apartment, arms crossed, staring directly at the camera. He didn't try the door or leave any messages. He just stood there for 10 full minutes before walking away. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from the group chat, where my photo was being shared to wider and wider networks. Randy's behavior right now is making me wonder what kind of power he thinks he has in this kitchen world. The way he posted her address and got all these other chefs involved so quickly, there's something really strange about how organized this whole. Someone had even created a fake social media profile using my picture, posting inflammatory comments on restaurant pages. The morning of my 5th day, I woke to find my car windshield covered in printed screenshots from the group chat. As I cleared them away, I noticed several chefs watching from across the parking lot. They didn't approach, just watched and whispered among themselves. I had one last restaurant on my preliminary list. Part of me wanted to skip it, to hide in my apartment until my official start date, but I thought about Randy's smirk as he locked me in that freezer, his confidence that he could destroy my career before it even began. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The final restaurant was a small Italian place on the edge of the district. I'd deliberately saved it for last, hoping word hadn't spread this far, but as soon as I walked in, I recognized one of the line cooks from Randy's kitchen. His eyes widened when he saw me. He immediately pulled out his phone, and I watched him typing furiously in the group chat. Within minutes, 3 more chefs from nearby restaurants had arrived. They formed a semicircle around me, phones out, recording my every move. The owner, confused by the sudden crowd in his dining room, emerged from the office. The chefs all started talking at once, showing him their phones, gesturing at me. I stood my ground, maintaining eye contact with the owner as his expression shifted from confusion to concern. "I think you should go," he said finally. "I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want any trouble." As I walked through the gauntlet of chefs to the exit, one of them stepped directly in my path. It was someone I didn't recognize, but his chef's jacket bore the logo of one of the district's most prestigious restaurants. "Randy's a friend of mine," he said quietly, "and he told us exactly what kind of person you are. You think you can just walk into our kitchens and destroy our lives? Think again." I sidestepped him and made it to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The group had followed me outside, still recording, still muttering threats just loud enough for me to hear, but not clear enough for any recording to pick up. As I drove away, I realized Randy had won this round. He'd turned the entire culinary community against me before I'd even officially started my job. My phone showed 57 unread messages in the group chat, my address being shared to even more networks, more chefs joining the campaign against me. But tomorrow was my official first day as district health inspector. Tomorrow, I would have my badge, my authority, and most importantly, the element of surprise. Randy thought he'd destroyed me before I could begin. He had no idea what was coming. I pulled into my apartment complex to find Randy's van parked in my usual spot. He was leaning against it, arms crossed, that same smirk on his face from the kitchen. As I parked elsewhere and walked past him, he called out, "Sleep tight, Inspector. Big day tomorrow." I didn't respond. I just walked up to my apartment, past the new graffiti on my door, past the pile of garbage someone had left, and locked myself inside. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. I sat at my kitchen table that night, laptop open, methodically organizing every piece of evidence. Screenshots of the group chat messages filled folder after folder. Photos of the harassment at my door, the vandalism on my car, Randy standing outside my apartment. I created spreadsheets tracking which chefs had participated, which restaurants they worked at, what violations I'd observed during my visits. My phone vibrated with another notification from the group chat. A chef I didn't recognize had posted a photo of my apartment building with the caption asking if anyone wanted to join him for a visit. The responses came quickly, other chefs volunteering to meet up. I screenshot everything, adding it to my growing file. Sleep came in fitful bursts. Every creak in the building made me bolt upright. Around 3 a.m., my doorbell camera sent an alert. 3 men in chef's whites stood outside, one spray painting something on my door while the others kept watch. They wore baseball caps pulled low, but I recognized the stance of one of them from Randy's kitchen. I saved the footage, backing it up to multiple cloud services. Morning arrived with my alarm at 6 a.m. Today was officially my first day as district health inspector. I dressed carefully in my most professional suit, pinned my new badge to my jacket, and gathered my inspection materials. The graffiti on my door now read, "Liar lives here," in dripping red paint. I photographed it before heading to my car. The district office was a modest building downtown. I arrived early, wanting to review protocols and pick up my official inspection forms before heading out. The receptionist receptionist handed me a thick folder of paperwork and my inspection kit. I spent an hour familiarizing myself with the official procedures, cross-referencing them with the violations I'd witnessed at Randy's restaurant. My first official inspection was scheduled for 10 a.m. at a small cafe across town. I deliberately chose a place with no apparent connection to Randy's network. The owner greeted me warmly, clearly nervous but cooperative. The inspection went smoothly, with only minor violations that were easily correctable. It felt good to do my job properly, without harassment or threats. But as I sat in my car afterward, updating my inspection report on my tablet, I noticed a familiar van in the parking lot, Randy's van. He wasn't inside, but the message was clear. He was tracking my movements. I decided to change tactics. Instead of following my scheduled route, I drove to a restaurant I knew was part of Randy's network. If they wanted to play games, I'd bring the game to them. The Silver Spoon was an upscale place known for its temperamental head chef, Marcus, who'd been one of the most vocal supporters in the group chat. Walking through the front door with my badge visible, I announced myself to the hostess. The color drained from her face as she stammered that she'd get the owner. I could hear frantic movement in the kitchen, the telltale sounds of a hasty cleanup in progress. Marcus emerged from the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. He blocked my path to the kitchen, arms crossed. I calmly explained that refusing a health inspection was grounds for immediate closure. His jaw clenched, but he stepped aside. The kitchen was in chaos. Staff scrambled to hide obvious violations while trying to appear casual. I methodically documented everything. Food stored at improper temperatures, cross-contamination between raw and cooked items, grease buildup that hadn't been cleaned in months, mouse droppings near the dry storage. Marcus followed me, getting increasingly agitated. He pulled out his phone, typing furiously. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications. The group chat exploded with messages about my inspection. Chefs from across the district were mobilizing. I continued my inspection, thorough and professional. When I reached the walk-in cooler, I found expired products shoved behind newer stock. The temperature gauge showed it running too warm. I documented everything, taking photos and making detailed notes. By the time I finished, a crowd had gathered outside. At least a dozen chefs from various restaurants stood on the sidewalk, phones out, recording my exit. Randy stood at the center, that familiar smirk on his face. I walked past them without acknowledgement, got in my car, and drove to my next scheduled inspection. They followed, a convoy of vans and cars trailing me through the city. At each stop, they'd pile out, warning the owners, trying to interfere with my work. The harassment escalated throughout the week. My apartment became a target for nightly visits. Garbage dumped on my doorstep, dead fish left in the hallway. My car vandalized repeatedly. The super of my building started leaving me messages, saying other tenants were complaining about the disturbances. I documented everything meticulously. Every incident, every threat, every person involved. My evidence folders grew larger each day. But I kept working, kept doing my inspections, kept maintaining my professional demeanor despite the escalating campaign against me. On my fourth official day, I arrived at a family-owned restaurant to find Randy himself in the kitchen, talking animatedly with the owner. They both turned when I entered, Randy's smirk widening. The owner, an older man named Mr. Petrov, looked uncomfortable. Randy patted him on the shoulder and headed for the door, but not before making a throat-slitting gesture where only I could see it. Mr. Petrov apologized for Randy's presence, explaining that Randy had shown up claiming I was a fraud. I assured him I wasn't, and proceeded with my inspection. His kitchen was clean, well-organized, with only minor issues. As I filled out my report, Mr. Petrov approached me quietly. He glanced around nervously before speaking in a low voice. He told me Randy had been messaging all the restaurant owners, trying to organize a formal complaint against me. Some owners were uncomfortable with it, but Randy was persistent, threatening to badmouth any restaurant that didn't join his campaign. I thanked Mr. Petrov for the information and finished my report. As I left, I noticed Randy's van parked across the street. He was sitting inside, watching, waiting. That evening, I decided to be proactive. I created a fake social media account and joined several local restaurant worker groups. What I found there was illuminating. Randy's harassment campaign extended beyond just me. There were whispered stories about other women who'd crossed him, former employees who'd been driven out of the industry, a pattern of behavior that went back years. I started reaching out to these women privately. Randy's turning into the world's worst stalker chef, leaving his van like some creepy calling card while organizing a whole mafia of angry cooks who apparently have nothing better to do than follow health inspectors around town. Some didn't respond, others were too scared to talk, but a few shared their stories. Similar experiences of harassment, intimidation, and career sabotage. None had been in a position to fight back like I was. One woman, Carl, had been a sous chef at Randy's restaurant 3 years ago. She told me about the constant inappropriate touching, the vulgar comments, the way Randy would corner her in the walk-in cooler. When she finally complained to the owner, Randy had launched a campaign to destroy her reputation. She'd ended up leaving the industry entirely, now working in retail. Another woman, Emma, had been a server who'd rejected Randy's advances. He'd planted substances in her locker and called in an anonymous tip. Though the charges were eventually dropped, the damage to her reputation was done. She'd moved to another state to start over. Their stories fueled my determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. Randy had been doing this for years, protected by a network of enablers and a culture of silence. I started documenting these stories too, building a comprehensive file on Randy's pattern of behavior. But I knew I needed more than just documentation. I needed to be strategic. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find my supervisor, Connor, waiting for me. He looked concerned, holding a stack of papers. Formal complaints had been filed against me by 6 restaurant owners, all alleging unprofessional conduct and bias. I calmly presented my evidence. The harassment, the threats, the coordinated campaign against me. Connor reviewed everything, his expression growing more serious with each piece of documentation. He assured me he'd investigate, but warned me to be careful. Randy had connections, and this was escalating beyond simple harassment. I spent the rest of the day doing inspections under increased scrutiny. Every restaurant I visited had been warned I was coming. Some had clearly spent the night deep cleaning. Others had simply closed for maintenance when they heard I was in the area. But Randy made a mistake. In his eagerness to discredit me, he'd been sloppy with his own restaurant. When I arrived for an official follow-up inspection based on my initial observations, I found numerous critical violations, the same issues I'd documented during my unofficial visit, plus new ones ones that had developed in the chaos of the past week. Randy wasn't there, but his sous chef, Walton, was running the kitchen. He looked exhausted, stressed, and when he saw me, something in his expression shifted. Not anger or hostility, but relief. As I conducted my inspection, Walton quietly pointed out additional violations I might have missed. A subtle gesture toward the meat storage where temperatures weren't being properly logged. A meaningful glance at the hand washing station where the soap dispensers had been empty for days. I documented everything thoroughly. This inspection alone would be enough to seriously impact Randy's restaurant, but I sensed there was more. Walton kept glancing at the office, then at me, clearly wrestling with something. After I finished the kitchen inspection, I asked to review their employee records and training documentation. Walton led me to the office, then closed the door behind us. He pulled out his phone, showing me messages from Randy instructing the staff to hide violations, to lie to inspectors, to cover up food safety issues that could make people sick. He told me he was tired of it all. The harassment of female staff, the corners cut on food safety, the toxic environment Randy created. Other staff members felt the same but were too scared to speak up. Randy had connections, power, and a vindictive streak that kept everyone in line. I photographed the messages, adding them to my evidence file. Walton also gave me contact information for former employees who might be willing to talk. As I left the restaurant, I felt the tide beginning to turn, but Randy wasn't done. That night, the harassment reached new levels. My doorbell camera captured him personally leading a group of 6 chefs to my door. They didn't just leave garbage this time. They pounded on the door, shouting threats, trying the handle repeatedly. One of them had brought tools, attempting to jimmy the lock. I called building security, but by the time they arrived, the group had scattered. The security guard, an older man named Theo, looked at the damage to my door and shook his head. He'd been getting complaints all week, he said. The building management was pressuring him to do something about the situation. I showed him the footage from my doorbell camera, the clear evidence of attempted breaking and entering. Theo said he'd file a report, but warned me that the building management was considering asking me to leave if the disturbances continued. Randy was trying to get me evicted. The next day, I arrived at work to find more formal complaints had been filed, but this time, Connor had news for me. He'd been investigating the complaints and found inconsistencies. The timestamps didn't match up with my actual inspection times. Some of the alleged incidents had supposedly occurred at restaurants I hadn't even visited yet. Moreover, Connor had received calls from several restaurant owners who wanted to withdraw their complaints. They admitted Randy had pressured them into filing false reports. Mr. Petrov had been particularly vocal, stating he'd been threatened with negative reviews and harassment if he didn't participate. Connor officially cleared me of the complaints and opened an investigation into Randy's interference with official health department business. It wasn't enough to stop him yet, but it was a start. I continued my inspections, now with Connor's full support. More restaurant owners began cooperating, tired of Randy's bullying tactics. Some even shared their own stories of Randy's attempts to manipulate the system, to avoid inspections, to cover up violations. The chef network that had seemed so united began to fracture. Messages in the group chat showed disagreement. Some chefs questioned whether they'd been told the truth about me. Others shared their own negative experiences with Randy. A few even reached out to me privately, apologizing for their participation. One of these chefs, Rose, met me at a coffee shop to share what she knew. She'd worked with Randy years ago and had witnessed his pattern of behavior firsthand. She gave me names, dates, specific incidents that corroborated the stories I'd been collecting. But the most valuable information came from an unexpected source. Randy's own arrogance would be his downfall. In his attempts to maintain control over his network, he'd been sending increasingly aggressive messages in the group chat, threats against anyone who cooperated with me, admissions of his past actions against other women, detailed plans for continued harassment. Several chefs screenshot these messages and forwarded them to me. Randy was creating evidence against himself, too confident in his power to realize the danger. The situation reached a crescendo on my 10th day as official inspector. I arrived at a restaurant for a routine inspection to find Randy there with a group of his remaining loyal supporters. But this time, the restaurant owner stood beside me, having called Connor to report Randy's attempt to interfere with the inspection. Randy's face contorted with rage when he saw the owner's support. He started yelling, making accusations, threatening everyone who didn't fall in line. His supporters looked uncomfortable, some backing away as his behavior became increasingly erratic. I maintained my professional composure, conducting my inspection while Randy ranted. The owner had security escort Randy and his group from the premises. As they left, I heard one of the chefs tell Randy he'd gone too far, that this wasn't what they'd signed up for. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Walton. Randy had called an emergency meeting at his restaurant, demanding all staff attend. Walton recorded the meeting, where Randy's paranoia and aggression were on full display. He threatened any staff member who cooperated with health inspections. He admitted to falsifying temperature logs. He bragged about driving out women who'd rejected him. The recording was damning. Combined with everything else I'd collected, it painted a clear picture of a man who'd abused his position for years, protected by a culture of fear and silence. But I knew Randy wouldn't give up easily. That night, my doorbell camera alert showed him approaching my door again. This time, he was alone, and he looked different, desperate. He stood there for a long moment, then began speaking to the camera. He tried everything: threats, bribes, appeals to sympathy. He offered to leave me alone if I'd just transfer to another district. He promised to reform his kitchen practices. He even attempted tears, claiming I was destroying his life's work. I didn't respond. I just saved the footage, adding it to my ever-growing file of evidence. Randy's empire was crumbling, and he knew it. The question now was how far he'd go in his desperation to save it. The morning after Randy's desperate plea to my doorbell camera, I arrived at work to find Connor waiting with a thick manila folder. He'd completed his investigation into the false complaints. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had Randy orchestrated the entire campaign, but he'd also left a digital trail of threats and bribes to other restaurant owners. Connor informed me that the health department was taking unprecedented action. Randy's restaurant would face immediate suspension of its operating license pending a full investigation. Additionally, any chef who'd participated in the harassment campaign would be flagged in the system for extra scrutiny during future inspections. I spent the morning conducting routine inspections, but everywhere I went, the atmosphere had shifted. Word traveled fast in the culinary community. Randy melting down at his own emergency meeting while Walton secretly secretly records him, is like watching someone dig their own grave with a golden shovel. The irony is almost too perfect to believe. Chefs who'd been hostile just days before now avoided eye contact. Some approached me quietly between inspections, apologizing for their participation, explaining how Randy had manipulated them with threats about their own careers. At lunch, I received a text from Walton. Randy had shown up at the restaurant despite the suspension notice, trying to rally his remaining staff, but something had fundamentally changed. When Randy ordered them to hide evidence of violations, the staff refused. When he threatened them, they pulled out their phones to record him. His power had evaporated overnight. That afternoon, I arrived at a small family restaurant for a scheduled inspection. The owner, a woman named Wendy, greeted me warmly. As I worked through my checklist, she mentioned that several other restaurant owners had been discussing Randy's behavior in their private forums. Stories were emerging that went back over a decade. Women who'd been driven from the industry, health inspectors who'd been threatened, a pattern of intimidation that everyone had been too afraid to address until now. By evening, the chef group chat had transformed. Where once it had been filled with threats and harassment, now it buzzed with confessions and apologies. Chefs shared their own experiences of Randy's bullying. Some admitted they'd only participated because they feared becoming his next target. The same network Randy had weaponized against me was now documenting his history of abuse. I returned home to find my apartment building surprisingly quiet. No garbage at my door, no graffiti, no chefs lurking in the parking lot. For the first time in weeks, I could walk to my door without checking over my shoulder. Inside, I updated my evidence files with the day's developments. The documentation had grown to hundreds of pages. Screenshots, photos, recordings, witness statements. It painted a comprehensive picture of systematic harassment and abuse of power. My phone buzzed with a message from Rose. She'd been contacted by 3 other women who'd worked with Randy over the years. They wanted to share their stories, to add their voices to the growing chorus of truth. We arranged to meet the following evening. The next morning brought unexpected news. Randy's restaurant owner had terminated his employment, citing the health department's suspension and multiple harassment complaints from former employees. The owner issued a public statement condemning Randy's behavior and promising comprehensive reforms. I conducted my inspections that day with renewed purpose. At each restaurant, I found owners and chefs eager to demonstrate their compliance, their professionalism, their commitment to food safety. The shadow Randy had cast over the district's culinary scene was finally lifting. That evening, I met with Rose and the other women at a quiet cafe. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to what I'd already documented. Randy's pattern was consistent. Target women who challenged him, use his network to destroy their reputations, force them out of the industry. But now, finally, they felt safe enough to speak up. One woman, Sarah, had kept detailed records of Randy's harassment from 5 years ago. She'd been too scared to use them at the time, but now she handed me a USB drive filled with emails, text messages, and photos. Another woman, Lisa, had audio recordings of Randy's threats when she'd rejected his advances. The evidence was overwhelming. As we talked, I realized the true scope of Randy's impact. Dozens of talented professionals driven from careers they loved, restaurants that had suffered under his toxic influence, a culture of fear that had persisted for years. But now, finally, it was ending. The following days brought a cascade of consequences for Randy. The State Restaurant Association revoked his membership. The culinary school where he'd occasionally taught banned him from campus. Restaurants throughout the district blacklisted him. His professional reputation, built on intimidation and fear, crumbled completely. I continued my work as health inspector, but now with the full support of the culinary community. Restaurant owners welcomed my inspections, seeing them as opportunities to improve rather than threats to avoid. The toxic culture Randy had cultivated was being replaced by one of professionalism and mutual respect. Walton reached out to update me on the situation at Randy's former restaurant. The owner had promoted him to head chef and implemented comprehensive reforms. The kitchen environment had transformed from one of fear to one of collaboration. Staff members who'd been too scared to speak up about violations now felt empowered to maintain the highest standards. One afternoon, while conducting an inspection at a downtown bistro, I encountered one of Randy's former supporters. He approached me hesitantly, clearly nervous. He explained how Randy had manipulated him, threatened his career, made him believe I was the enemy. He apologized profusely and thanked me for standing up to Randy when no one else would. The chef network that Randy had weaponized underwent its own transformation. New moderators implemented strict policies against harassment and intimidation. The toxic culture of protecting abusers was replaced with one of accountability and support. Chefs began sharing resources about workplace rights and reporting mechanisms. I received word that Randy had been spotted working at a food truck 2 districts over, but his reputation preceded him. When local chefs learned of his presence, they warned the food truck owner about his history. Within days, Randy was let go. The network he'd once controlled now ensured he couldn't simply relocate and repeat his pattern of abuse. My apartment building's management, who had once considered evicting me due to the disturbances, now apologized for not taking the harassment more seriously. They implemented new security measures and assured me that any future incidents would be met with immediate action. The evidence I'd compiled became part of a larger case file. While criminal charges were being considered for the attempted break-in and sustained harassment, the professional consequences were already severe. Randy's career in the culinary industry was effectively over. No reputable establishment would hire him, and his attempts to find work were met with closed doors. 3 weeks after that first terrifying night of harassment, I conducted an inspection at a new restaurant opening in the district. The owner introduced me to his head chef, Carl, the woman who'd been Randy's sous chef years ago. She'd returned to the industry after hearing about Randy's downfall, finally feeling safe to pursue her passion again. As I worked through my inspection checklist, I noticed something remarkable. The kitchen operated with precision and professionalism, but also with joy. Staff members communicated openly, supported each other, and took pride in maintaining the highest standards. This was what kitchens could be without the shadow of fear and intimidation. Connor called me into his office to discuss the impact of recent events. The health department was implementing new policies based on my experience. Anonymous reporting mechanisms for inspector harassment, stronger partnerships with restaurant associations to address systemic issues, training programs on professional conduct and workplace respect. The women I'd met through this ordeal formed an informal support network. We met monthly to share experiences and support others who'd faced similar harassment. What had started as Randy's attempt to destroy my career had transformed into a movement for change in the industry. I learned that Randy had attempted to start over in another state, but the story of his behavior had spread beyond our district. Restaurant industry forums and social media groups shared warnings about him. The network he'd once used as a weapon now served as a shield protecting others from his abuse. My daily inspections became routine again, but with a crucial difference. I was no longer seen as an adversary, but as a partner in maintaining public health and safety. Restaurant owners and chefs approached me with questions, seeking guidance rather than trying to hide violations. One morning, I arrived at a restaurant to find a small gift on the hostess stand with my name on it. Inside was a card signed by dozens of restaurant workers, thanking me for standing up to Randy and helping create a safer industry for everyone. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. The investigation into Randy's actions continued to uncover new details. Financial irregularities at his restaurant, health code violations he'd covered up for years, a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond harassment. Each revelation added to the case against him and validated the stand I'd taken. As I reflected on the past month, I realized how close Randy had come to succeeding. If I'd given in to the intimidation, if I'd transferred districts or quit, he would have continued his reign of terror indefinitely. But by standing firm and documenting everything, I'd helped break the cycle. My work as a health inspector continued with renewed purpose. Each inspection was an opportunity to ensure public safety and promote professional standards. The shadow Randy had cast over the district was gone, replaced by a culture of accountability and respect. The industry was healing, and I was proud to be part of that process. Thanks for letting me wonder right alongside you through all of this. Definitely made for some interesting moments. Until next time, friend, like the video, it helps more than you think.